And then this notion of other things we want to do, we talked about creating landscapes within landscapes. So this idea that there's fine scale patchiness and we need to do that. This is how fire gets interrupted. This is how insect and disease patterns get interrupted. This is how wildlife uses habitats with edge and places that they can hide and use for nesting. So those are important. And we want to make sure that we hang on to fire tolerant structures of large size classes and of certain species compositions. And we can look at that as well. We can look at all these things from what we've learned. And we can also know where in the landscape to put things. Probably not a good idea to try to manage for spotted owl habitat on a south aspect on a steep slope. But maybe it's a better place in the head wall of a basin or in these benches where these places potentially miss fire rotations. Okay? And in practice, when we put them down on the ground, you can kind of see how one plays out. And here's a place where we've picked as a priority to treat, and it's on a drier aspect. And you can see that there's some openings, there's some clumps. We've used prescribed fire. A few snags were created as a result. A few more clumps were left. The riparian area has a lot of vegetation left near it. And so we've really changed the structure, and I don't have a pre-photo of this, but the idea is that this is a changed structure in our landscape, and all those add up to changes that we are trying to strive for through this process. And so how are we doing? Well, unfortunately, the rate of our treatments, which are indicated by these colored bars, is falling way behind the amount of acres being burned by wildfire, which are these red lines. These are cumulative graphs, so you keep adding the acres as you go through time, and you can see that wildfire in 2014, when you look at all the treatment over the past 10 years, burned 5 times as much as we're treating. Now, that is only to explain to you that there's a lot of work to do. The idea would be not necessarily that we do that much treatment, but that we stabilize this curve and we bring these up in such a way that it's in meaningful locations in our landscape. If that makes sense. Any questions about that so far? Because I'm going to shift just a little to one last topic, and then we're going to have another little work exercise. John.
So, you have that, has anybody, maybe just taken something like looking at bar severity, run that same bar graph thing? If you could look at, like, say,
right.
low severity versus
yeah.
moderate high, and
yeah. You're right, John.
Take a stab at your potential veg or something. I mean, I know it takes a lot of time.
No, you're right, and that's why I kind of said just because there's a big disparity here,
yeah.
we want to do treatments that are in meaningful locations, and essentially the number of acres burned right now is a good surrogate for high severity conditions.
Yeah. I just know in the carbon complex I ran a thing with barn, and about a third of the forest vegetation that burned in Carlton was like low severity or unburned.
Right.
So it's kind of like 1/3 was high. It's just kind of interesting how. Well, I shouldn't say that, but it was in our South Summit planning area.
Right.
We had about, let's put it this way, about, maybe close to a third of the stuff that burned there is like low severity and moderate and the rest. So,
sure,
some of that,
and that's a good exercise, and that's something that we really should be doing. We should be asking, and we could do that easily with the same context that I've just been talking about. We could look at a burn landscape and ask the question now, what's the state of our current condition relative to those other measures? And I think what we're going to find, because I've done some of this on past fires, is that the amount of high and mixed severity fire is much greater than what we would expect for a similar landscape. But sometimes these, that's what I want to do is kind of say, they can be a little bit misleading, but I think this is a trend that we need to be aware of. More acres being burned, and we're not addressing the problem very well. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
So, does the politics of funding result in relatively small amounts of money available for treatment kind of scattered across the landscape, rather than being able to concentrate it in an area where it really makes a difference?
Very good point. Thank you for bringing that up, because that's something I wasn't going to talk about, but that's a very good point. And I would say the tradition has been in most land management agencies. Let's just take the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest, for example. It has 7 ranger districts. One national forest with 7 ranger districts. We get a budget to the forest. Question is, how do you allocate that budget? Do you divide it by 7 and send it out? That's a traditional model. Traditional model is everybody gets something to do work. Because arguably you could say there is important work to do on every ranger district. But is it equal? And I would argue it's not. It's not all equal. And now, let's just say, in Chelan a few years ago, both districts, a lot of burn landscape. Not much in the way of potential for more burning to occur in a significant way. Would that be a good investment for limited dollars in the short term? Maybe not. Maybe not. You could argue either way, but it's something you should stop and think about. Would we want to invest limited dollars in a place that's going to be free of fire for a while when we could go to work and do more things in other places? So, what we're doing to help inform that, and we're right in the middle of developing this now, we're using the same modeling system that we do for the landscape evaluations. I just talked about to you very quickly. And we're building that same kind of a model to prioritize watersheds across the whole national forest and say, where are our highest priority places to go? And then it becomes up to the decision makers and our collaborators about how best to move forward with that information. And one would argue, put the money where the highest priority is and get it on a schedule and keep on it. Okay, that would be a wise thing to do. So we're in the process of doing that, and that's what I expect to do. There aren't so many politics in the way that money is allocated. That's fairly mechanical. The money comes, people ask for work, it gets divvied out. But what we want to do is be efficient with the money that we get. Okay? We want to be efficient with that money and do the most work. So that's what we're trying to do. Okay, for the last couple minutes, one of the other things folks wanted to know was a little bit about what you can do on private lands. And the best place to start is to talk about fire-wise and fire-adapted communities. And I just have a couple quick things here, and they're going to play into your little exercise here in a few minutes. So these are some things you've probably seen before. And one thing a homeowner in a fire-prone area can always do is apply these principles around their home. So you notice here in this little graphic, we have this 30-foot buffer around the house, and then we have another 100-foot buffer. And this fire-wise, and here is the website. If you go to this website, firewise.org, it has tons of information about what you can do around your house. It has training programs, it has forms that you can fill out and do your own evaluation, it has all kinds of things. This is a great place for people to go look. But essentially what you want to do in this close proximity is you want to try to prevent things that can be a source where an ember can land on it and start on fire. So you don't want to have wood by your house. You don't want to have needles on your roof. You don't want to have burnable vegetation around your house. You want to try to make a green space around your house and remove all of these flammable sources away from your house. So this is the notion that a fire, as it comes through, like Carlton's a good example of a lot of wind, there's a huge ember shower that's going on. And all those embers, as they land, if they land on a receptive fuel, and that could be your wood pile, they're going to ignite. So you want to take away as many possible sources of ignition away from your structure. So that's what you want to do. And then you want to do some other things that allow firefighters to come. You want to have good access, ingress and egress, a place to turn an engine around, because they're not going to drive in there if they have to nose in and back out a half a mile. It's not safe for them. What if they get trapped? So you want to think about all these things. And then the next buffer around here, you want to manage your vegetation. And what are the things you would want to do? Well, you want to have few trees, you want to have branches that are way off the ground, and if you can, you want this also to be a green area. So this gives you some idea of something you can do immediately around your structure. And these, like I said, there's lots of examples on the Firewise, and in fact you have a little brochure that Julie brought for you to hand out. Yes?
One thing that I experienced this summer was that our compost pile, anywhere we had straw, including between the potatoes,
Mm-hmm.
burned. And so be careful where you put your compost pile.
Right.
Any kind of straw.
Exactly.
That's not wood piles.
It's any burnable material that an ember can land on and ignite. Keep that away.
Richie, one other thing I was just going to mention is that the latest research on what's super effective
Mhm.
is a hopeful message, which is just that the 30-foot buffer
Mhm.
is the most important.
It is, yeah. What you want to do is you want to buy time to allow. Remember, there's not enough fire engines for everybody's house. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to buy time for your structure to survive the passage of that front. And the way you do that is make it as least flammable as possible. Okay, and then that allows firefighters or yourself to go back in after the fire has passed and secure your structure from any potential things that may get started. Something else that most people don't think about is your vents. So you have vents, by code you have vents, but if you know that you're going to be affected by a fire and you have time, like some of those warnings, get ready, not go, but get set, get ready, get go. When you have that moment and you have time, plug the vents in the floor, in the soffits, any place an ember can enter your structure. You don't want it to get in there, and they will get in. So cover those vents, remove all that vegetation, put some water out, get your roof wet, get the vegetation wet, provide something for somebody that comes that can safely protect your structure. So thank you, Susan. That was good. Another thing that's been happening the last few years is this whole idea is that we don't just want individual homes to be firewise, we want whole communities to be firewise. And this is a fairly good slide to end on, in that the whole, the title of this presentation is Living with Fire. And so those of us that live in the West, in fire-prone environments, need to figure out, if we're going to live there, how can we do so that it's not devastating every time we have one. And these principles work, and they work well if we build them into planning, if we take responsibility as homeowners to make sure we do our part and work with our neighbors to do that, that eventually maybe our whole community can be firewise. It's sort of the notion of preparing yourself for that event. On the East Coast, they prepare for hurricanes. They do certain kinds of building codes if they're going to live in hurricane environments. Why don't we do that well with wildfire? Why don't we do that? I think it's really important that communities need to be prepared for that, where we know we have fire-prone conditions. So there's another website right here, fireadaptedcommunities.org, and basically it's taking these firewise principles, but it's applying it to a whole community, so that if we look at a neighborhood or a whole community, these things add up. Oh, it sounds kind of familiar. It kind of sounds like what we've been talking about in terms of our treatments, right? Small treatments add up to big effects in the landscape. If you do your part around your house and in your neighborhood, that adds up to important fire-adapted conditions in your community. It's no difference, right? There's a good analogy there. So this is kind of cool. There's a lot of people that are associated with this organization, and I believe if your community is serious about doing that, that they'll even come out and certify you as a FireWise community and work with you. So this is a pretty cool program. It's something that I would suggest that folks think about is, can we be a FireWise, can we be a fire adapted community? Okay?
What does WUI mean?
The wildland urban interface. Yeah, it's the notion that homes are in the wildlands. Yeah. Okay, whew, threw a lot at you in that half hour. I knew I would. I'm kind of running out of gas too. I think some of you are as well. Here's the final thing to maybe get our blood flowing, okay? So, second section, we talked a lot about restoration approaches. So consider all that you've learned about a restoration approach. Get in your small groups again and look at these and give these some consideration. How can land managers accelerate treatment applications? What are the things that we can do to do that? Why will it be important that private and other landowners do similar work? And give some specific examples of vegetation work private landowners can do in this context. Does that make sense? So what are the things that we can begin to do now to maybe, knowing that we have a lot of work to do, what can we do? So let's take about 10 minutes to do that, and I'll bring us back together again. Sound good?
Homeowner associations have rules that are actually fire done. And obviously, when you live in this kind of area, those homeowner associations, a lot of them kind of go, oh, maybe we got to change our rules. Like, maybe we shouldn't forbid all landowners from chopping down trees.
Right. So tell me, what do you think, are there other things like that that require more than just working with a homeowners association? Are there other county or city or other kinds of ordinances that require more than just a homeowners association? Do you believe that's true?
Sure. Well, I mean, I thought if you're going to make a community, you want to think of natural green spaces.
Right.
And that's sort of planning the community, I don't know about ordinances. But.
So it takes county or city planning, right, in order to get to that point. So it's kind of needs to start with people, but it may require more of those kinds of involvement. There's a lot of this going on in Colorado. Colorado's had a fair amount of that. And another thing along those lines, just so you know, getting insurance companies involved so that they don't just rebuild the same thing over, but actually that there's some incentive through an insurance program to make sure that you're using FireWise materials and building or principles. We'll replace your structure if you do these things, so that's a good investment for them as well. So some of that's going on in other states. Okay, were there other things? Okay, next group, right here.
Well, along with that, I just bought a lot in town in
Yes.
Winthrop, and talking about the interface, my lot is at the end of the street,
Okay.
town limit. Then there's the ditch company,
Okay.
and then there's county owners on Studmores Mountain that are 20-acre
Right.
parcels with old bitter brush and sagebrush on it. Their houses are way up at the top, but their property comes down to that ditch.
Mhm.
So in my case, I've got 3 pieces that need to be
Okay.
integrated.
Okay. Right. So one of the things that we struggle with as land managers is just this whole notion of adjacent landowners. So imagine, like this Ranger District, for example, how many different landowners do we have adjacent to where National Forest is? It's a bunch. And so if you do something on your land, but they don't do something on theirs next, could it potentially diminish the work that you did? Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why it's a big effort for everyone in a whole community, in a whole valley, to really begin to understand what it takes to do these things on a broad scale. And your example scaled up is the kind of thing that we deal with a lot. So those are challenges. So how would you go about it? What kinds of things might you do?
Well, it's gotta be there's the neighborhood piece, and then that whole neighborhood is bordered by that ditch company.
Okay.
It's a 60-foot easement that goes through, and that section of ditch is now piped. It's not free-flowing
Okay.
anymore.
Mhm.
And then you've got multiple owners on Studhorse whose 20 acres come all the way down to that ditch, right
Mhm.
there on the edge of everybody.
Okay, so it's education, it's a whole variety of things that's required, and it takes effort. Now, I'll tell you one thing, a lesson learned, I'll tell you right now, from '94, from the Leavenworth community, right after the fire, and for a couple years, it was fresh on everyone's mind, that, oh, these are important things we need to do. And guess what? They fade with time, because it becomes a memory, oh yeah, remember, it's not very high fire danger for a little while, so I don't need to do anything just yet. And then eventually that kind of momentum goes away. So I would challenge you all to figure out ways to keep it in the forefront of your community. How do you do that? How do you keep it fresh and real when the memory fades of the Carlton complex, as it will? How are you going to keep that fresh in people's minds so that they are considering all these things that need to be done and done collectively? So that's a challenge to you. Another table, right here.
I just have a question with regard to that. How do you deal with the state DNR?
Well, the DNR is another landowner, and they have similar challenges as all the rest of us do. And they have a limited budget on a lot of fronts, but they're interested in doing things as well. And in fact, the DNR is the vehicle by which a lot of federal dollars to do work on private land comes through. They're the ones that administer it. There's been what they call National Fire Plan dollars available for communities and landowners to compete for grants to do work on their property. And the DNR is the agency that administers those grants. So they have a very prominent role in doing work in this regard. I understand. And we're all guilty of that to some degree, right? You can't, when you have a lot of things that you're responsible for, a lot of area, it's tough to do work everywhere. Hence the need to prioritize and work with partners and make it an effort. So, yeah, they have their challenges as well, but they are also interested in these things. Okay?
So you suggested that they be contacted?
Absolutely, yeah. Bring a local DNR employee that's involved in that kind of work, in the fire program particularly, into the fold and ask them what are the opportunities for grants and partnering and those kinds of things. I think it's absolutely important. In the same way that you would come to us with, hey, why aren't you doing things there? It's that way with any other public land manager. Others? Yes.
Yeah, I guess I have this vision that looking at your restoration strategy
Mhm.
and the way that was all developed with the different levels of analysis, that could be applied on a community level.
Yep.
To everything from, the interior, residential and commercial areas all the way out into the national forest and over all of the land management boundaries and everything. And I guess I do know in Colorado there was some of that done that was pushed more from, a county or municipal, government level. And I don't know if we have that support here. And I just wonder if you've got any ideas on how something like this could be done. And if there are examples of places where it hasn't been initiated and supported by, like, the county.
Okay, so that's a really good discussion, and thanks for bringing it up. The beauty of what we've developed here is it knows no ownership boundary. It's tied to a watershed boundary, and it allows you to look at a landscape regardless of ownership. And it identifies the things and places that are departed, broken in your landscape and that need to be addressed, regardless of ownership. And so, as we apply this strategy broadly across the forest, and we begin to work with these collaboratives. Are you aware of the North Central Washington Forest Health Collaborative?
Yeah, I'm on it.
Okay, you're on, good. That's embarrassing. Do I see you at the meetings and not? Okay, sorry. Lots of people, hard to keep track. So these collaborators are very important in that regard. I think that the collaborative could be the vehicle by which this gets applied in more places than just on national forests, but in multi-ownership. An example, Nature Conservancy has been working with us on the Taposh Collaborative on the south end of the forest. They have individuals who have learned how to apply the restoration strategy, how to push the buttons on the model, how to interpret the results, and to guide people through that process. And they're doing a landscape evaluation that involves about 10% Forest Service ownership, and the rest is state and private. And they're leading that effort, using the same principles, the same approach. And so when they're done, and we're involved with that, then what they find we can apply to our lands, and everybody else can apply to theirs. So there's tremendous opportunity to do that. And I don't see any reason why. I mean, the North Central Washington Collaborative is helping the Methow Valley Ranger District through this. So we're working on the next project mission that help fund the photo interpretation. We're using Derek Churchill. Some of you may know Derek. He's a very good researcher involved with this work. And he's doing some of the interpretation and the analysis. And it's an all lands, all hands approach. That's how I kind of like to say it. And there's no reason we can't do more of that. And this is one way that we can accelerate what we're doing, is by the all hands approach. If other people become proficient at doing this work, it doesn't just have to be a federal land thing. In fact, we don't want it to be. We want it to be, do this work, do this analysis, and identify where the work is regardless of ownership. So that's an important thing. And I think collaboratives largely are the vehicle for that. That's what I think. Other things? Yes?
Can you talk a little bit more about the commercial value of this management?
Right. Okay, so very good. Commercial value. So one of the things that makes total sense to me is that if these restoration projects have the ability to pay for themselves, then the taxpayer doesn't have to burden the cost of that work. In fact, there's some benefit from it, right? We put people to work, helps the local economy, all of those kinds of things. So what we really want to do is, in our analysis, be able to have some way of evaluating that potential and have that be part of how we prioritize where we go first. Not that we won't go to those places later, but first, because it's a good investment and it's a high priority place to do the work that I've talked about. So we're in this process of working with industry representatives and other members of the collaborative, as well as us, to come up with a way to evaluate that and incorporate this into the process right up front, so that we have some notion of, could these projects also pay for themselves, even a little bit. So if we're not all out paying for thinning work when it has low value, but it has some value, that's better than nothing. And those are the kinds of things we want to know. The challenge we have, okay, on this whole economic side relative to restoration treatments in forest environments, is the problem is really about trees that are this big, and lots of them. They have low value. They're hard to get out of the woods, and we have no place to process them. We have a mill in Colville, we have one at Pile Rock in Oregon, and we have one on the west side of the Cascades. That's a long ways to truck material that's this big. So this is one of those problems that is not solved easily, because this requires that you build infrastructure, and that you have the ability to feed that infrastructure with the material, that you can guarantee all that material. And that's a problem. That's a tough problem to solve. And another reason why we need collaboratives, because if we don't have kind of collective will to move towards those things, then this stuff will continue to have no value and have no way to get it out of the woods. So it's one of those wicked problems, as we call it. Yeah.
What gives you cause for hope?
Everything. I strongly believe in this process that we've developed, and believe that it can help us solve some of those wicked problems. And so I'm beginning to see it being used, and so I have a lot of cause for hope. I see communities pulling together and being involved and understanding and helping. For example, this group here, I mean, look at this group in the small valley that's here to learn about these things. It's pretty impressive. This is a large group. All of those things add up to me believing that what we are trying to do can be accomplished and that we can be successful. Believe me, there's a lot of days I go to work and I wonder, are we really going to solve some of these things? But it's gaining momentum, and people are involved and they understand, and I see us going faster. I think if we go faster at how we plan, that means we'll go faster at getting the job done, and that gives me hope. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to chime in on that because I'm also a stubborn optimist. But a lot of the recent wildfires we've had around the Methow Valley have been more high severity than we would want. However, some of them have done good work, you know, and so some of these wildfires are doing the work of field treatments, and that's hopeful too. They're not all uniformly high severity.
Or bad.
Or
They may be
bad.
high severity, but some of the fires are doing, as Paul likes to say, they're doing the heavy lifting for
That's
us.
true.
Places that we can't get to for other reasons, but the result still might be fairly desirable. Case in point, 2012 fires. Many of those did work in places that when I drive by now, I would have thought we'd apply a prescribed fire to it. They look great, and they've done some of that work that we wouldn't have gotten to in any time soon. So they really are, in some cases, in some locations, doing the heavy lift for us. It's really the area of our drive force and that transitioning into our urban interface. It's the biggest problem. Low value material, right next to homes, highly departed systems. Those are the ones that we need to get a real handle on. Thank you.
So Richie, now that, so we have a lot of work to do where we haven't had any fire in a long time.
Right.
And we've got from the Columbia to Canada kind of taken care of on the east side.
On that side,
So how do we maintain that? Is there, any kind of, when there's fires that happen in that new landscape,
Whoa.
or infant
Ah.
landscape, what's gonna happen? Are we gonna keep putting out fires?
that's a good question.
Because now.
So what do you think? Let me just ask this. What do you think would make logical sense at this point?
Well, I think to try and protect around communities and let those burn would be,
And what would those recurring fires now do for us? What do they do in that new landscape that's developing?
they would put the patches, the holes.
Ah, right.
I mean, we might need to manufacture some as well, where you've got
Right.
a lot of things you couldn't burn all the way and a lot
Right.
of standing.
So, I mean, that's excellent. So remember, Paul's core principles, one of them is restore the patchwork pattern the process will follow. These processes will follow. So if we do that, if we allow a few of these fires to burn where it makes sense to do that, okay, we don't want to be affecting communities, but let's say you're in a tripod. At some point, there's going to be enough fuel on the ground, a fire's going to start, and it's going to carry. Will it get real big? Probably not. But it begins to create some of that patchwork. And I would argue that we should consider that. And we have the ability in our current federal policies to allow that to happen. The question is, can we pull that off? Because really one of the biggest issues we have is by the time you get a fire that would start and burn in one of those places, we're in a national preparedness level 5, which means the highest level, and all resources are committed. And where are they going to go? They're going to go to the places where we have homes and people endangered. And we're not going to have a lot of resources. And so we're going to say, we can't afford that fire to get big. It's easy to put out right now. Take an engine out there and put it out. Put some smoke jumpers on it, put it out, because we can't afford another big fire. And that is reality. And that's the place that we get as a country, as an agency, as multiple fireland agencies. There are not enough resources to go around. So that's one way. Another way would be, why don't we apply some prescribed fire in that landscape? when we can have it on our terms. Let's do it in the fall, right before snow, when it will burn, and create some patches. It's another way. So there's a variety of things, but I think you hit on the point. If wildfire is going to do some of the heavy lifting for us, then didn't we also have a point here to maintain our investment? So what are we going to do to help maintain that heavy lift? That's a challenge. I'll just say that's another one of those wicked problems that we have, because it has to do with funding availability and resources. That's part of the issue. But good, keep bringing it up, because I agree. I think we should. Absolutely should. Well, let's see. I'm losing my voice and it's 8 o'clock, Julie.
Yes. I was gonna see if there's one last question, or if there's anything else you wanna wrap up on, or then we'll close up.
Well, just thank you for for participating. I think that the little group exercise, I hope you like that. It's better than the lecture I did for 2 hours. At least got you to use your brain cells and be involved in what we were talking about. You guys all did a great job of coming up with super ideas, so thank you for that.